What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the freezing capital of Ukraine, also known as Kiev. It's like minus 12 degrees today. And so I wanted to make this video and talk to you about 5 effective methods of learning Russian or Ukrainian. Now, I'm not going to be talking about which language you should learn. That's really up to you. I have another video on this subject. It's really up to you, because the advice that I'm going to be talking about in this video is going to apply to both languages. Pretty much regardless of which language you choose, the advice that follows is going to apply. Now, Russian is my native language. I pretty much grew up speaking it. It's my mother's native tongue. And so obviously I did not need to learn Russian. But I have lived abroad. I spent close to a decade in Latin America, and so I learned those languages in Latin America. I also learned a Baltic language into conversational fluency, which is a very difficult language to learn, in addition to Russian, Ukrainian, and I can also get around in a couple of Latin languages to some extent. So I have experience when it comes to learning new languages, and so I view Russian not as just another language that I was lucky to know it without having to learn it, but as a language that I deconstruct all the time. And so in a way I can explain to you how to learn it effectively, because I view it as a kind of like a scientist who is looking at new languages. And so what follows are 5 solid tips of advice that I think are going to help you a lot, because these are the tips that I used to learn all these other languages that I learned. And now I even feel that if I need to learn a new language, whether it's Finnish or Hungarian, I have a system in place that will allow me to do it. Okay? So without any further ado, let's talk about the 5 tips. So the first tip is motivation. Okay? You must have the right motivation. Okay, it's not just about motivation. It's actually having the right motivation, okay? And so what is the right motivation? Motivation is about your connection to the culture. Okay, so as an example, let's say you're currently in New York City, but you like everything Russian speaking, you like everything Eastern European, you like, Ukrainian speaking, you like everything Soviet, ex-Soviet. And you love the culture, you love the people, you love everything, and you plan on coming to this part of the world in order to maybe spend a week or spend 2 weeks or spend a month or spend the summer, and you want to maybe do it repeatedly, or maybe you want to come here and you want to live here for a year. That is strong motivation. Okay, you have the right motivation, because in this case what's going to happen is you're going to start learning the language. And you're not going to give up that easily, because you have to understand that learning a language is one of the hardest things out there, right? Because you're forced to think in a completely different way. You're forced to think, to change your thinking, to adapt. It's a very, very hard process. And so the right motivation is great. So another example of good motivation is, let's say you're living in LA and you love Latin culture. You love Mexico, you love Colombia, maybe you like Brazil. And so you know that you're going to be, in the future, maybe in 3 to 4 years, or 3 to 4 years you're going to spend in Latin America to some extent, right? You're going to be maybe living there, maybe volunteering, maybe working. You want to live in Mexico for a couple of years. That is a good level of motivation. Another really good motivation is if you have a significant other, boyfriend, girlfriend, fiance, wife, husband, that is from a different culture. Maybe you're dating somebody now, maybe you plan on dating, maybe you've married somebody from that culture. In that respect, that is very, very solid motivation. And I'm surprised that a lot more people don't go out and use this motivation to learn a second language. Let me tell you motivation that's just not as strong. Okay, so take me for example. I wake up one morning and I say to myself, I want to learn German. I think German would be cool. I watch a cool movie and I say I want to learn German, but I have zero ties to Germany. I don't plan on living in Germany. I'm not particularly crazy about the culture. I just think it's a cool language, right? It's just not strong enough motivation to learn it. So I know from my own experience that it's just not going to be strong enough for you to succeed, because you need stronger levels of motivation. Okay? Another example is Japanese. Okay, Japan is a cool country. I've personally never been to Japan. I heard awesome things about it. I want to travel. I want to, maybe spend some time there, explore it, etc., etc. But I do not see myself of living there for an extended amount of time. Okay? And so it's just not a strong enough motivation. Okay, so I know I will falter. Same thing with Chinese. You need a lot of motivation. And that is the first point that you have to consider. Now, the second piece of advice is something that I learned when I was living in Latin America as well as other countries, is that the first step to learning a new language is you have to just learn what I call survival mode version of that language. Okay, and so what is survival mode? Survival mode, imagine you are airdropped somewhere in the middle of rural Ukraine and you need to order food, you need to talk to people, you need to ask for directions, you need to ask them where the bathroom is. This is what I call survival language. And it's a small percentage of the actual language, but it includes things like why, when, how, where. It includes things like and, or. It includes things like can I, would I. Just the very, very basic things. And so whenever I need to learn a new language, I start with this survival mode, okay? Whether it's Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, anything else, you want to just learn that first slice of the language, regardless of what language it is. And when you're learning this, and it shouldn't even take you a long time to learn, you should learn it fairly quickly, because it's not a very big part of the language. Languages are very, very rich, right? They're very multifaceted. But this part you can learn fairly quickly, and you can memorize all that. And so let's say you're airdropped somewhere in the middle of northern Ukraine, and you need to learn Russian. You need to know how to say a few things in Russian or Ukrainian. You would need to learn how to say, how do I get to the train station? Where is the air? Just that survival stuff. And that's going to be just the beginning, okay? And this is a process that I call bootstrapping, because once you learn that survival stuff, you can bootstrap yourself to the next level. Because obviously just learning the basics, this survival mode, is not going to be enough. But that is how you bootstrap. And frankly, when you see a lot of people that learn foreign languages, many of them learn just that. People that lived many years in a foreign country, they know this survival language. And one thing you have to understand, or kind of the main thing you have to understand, is that do not worry about spelling, do not worry about grammar. You're gonna make mistakes when it comes to bootstrapping yourself. You're gonna make mistakes when it comes to the survival level, but it's just a start. And this brings me to another very, very important point. And this point is you never want to translate from your native language to the language you're learning, whether it's Russian or Ukrainian. And so let's say, for the sake of this example, you're learning Russian and your native language is English, okay? I am very comfortable in English because I've been speaking it for many, many years. And it's tempting to, whenever you learn a phrase, let's say in Russian, to translate it back to English so that you understand it. This is a huge mistake. You never want to be translating anything that you're learning into your native language, into a language you're most comfortable with. And the reason for that, this is very important to understand, is that languages are connection to the culture. They're very, very different. And so things that make sense in English are tied to that cultural aspect of America. Because even English in the US and English in the UK, in England, is different at times because the cultures are different. There are different sayings, there are different expressions, different idioms, stuff like that. Very, very important to understand. So there are going to be many situations where you learn a phrase, or you learn a saying, or you learn even a grammatically correct term that you cannot really translate it into your native language, because the word order, even the words, are going to be very, very different. And so that is something you have to understand. Very, very important, because a lot of people, when they are learning a new language, they are always translating it back and forth. And this is something you have to avoid at all costs. The best way, and I understand this is very difficult, I understand it's human nature to translate it into something they understand. But the best way to do it is, when you are learning a language, you have to learn it in action. You have to learn it kind of live. And what I mean by that is that when you're learning new terms, if you're, let's say you're learning Russian, you have to memorize what's happening in that particular situation whenever you learn the phrase. Now, I want to just preface this. This doesn't apply to words, right? Words have a direct one-to-one translation. Pen in English has a word, corresponding word in Russian. Pencil in English has a pencil in Russian. All of these words, they have very, very similar terms. For the most part, they're one-to-one. But when it comes to sentences, phrases, feelings, more complex things, you're gonna run into a lot of problems when you start translating back and forth. You wanna just learn it and leave it with the culture. You don't wanna keep translating it back and forth, because you're gonna have difficulty. You're gonna start to doubt, because a lot of times you may not find a very similar phrase in another language, and you're gonna be wondering, oh, wait a second, I don't know how to say this, because I can't remember how to say, I can't remember if this is the right thing to say in English or in another language, etc., etc. This is very important. You never want to be translating back and forth. You want to be learning it how it is, respecting the culture, tying it to the culture, and keeping it as part of the culture. The next point I want to clarify, and this is also a very, very important point, is that you have to understand that you're not going to learn 100% of the language, okay? Even if you're learning that second language or third language or fourth or fifth or etc., even if it's not your, if you've learned a foreign language before, even if it's not, I wanted to say, your second new language that you're learning, your first foreign language, you have to understand that you're never going to learn 100% of it. Even me, a native speaker of Russian, I still, sometimes in various situations, I'm not 100% sure the grammatically correct way to say something. And I've seen this with a lot of native speakers. Like, I've seen it in many situations. I mean, I speak really, really well, obviously. I'm fluent. But there are situations where I'm like, wait a second, like, which is the right way? And I've seen even other locals make this mistake. So this is something you have to understand. So when I talked about survival level language, you can think of it as like 20% or whatever, 10%. And as time goes on, you're going to be adding more and more, and you're going to get to a point where maybe 70% or 75%. And the corollary to this is that you're going to be making mistakes here and there. You're never going to be speaking it fluently, in a sense of like, never be making mistakes. You have to understand that making mistakes is fine. You're going to be making mistakes. Even me, as somebody who knows a couple of some other foreign languages, a bunch of other foreign languages, there are situations where I'm not sure the right way to say it, simply because I've never used that expression before. Whereas if a native speaker started with that language, they were using that phrase from the time they were a kid. And so obviously they've said it before, they've gotten a reaction, they know exactly how to say it correctly. So this is something that's very, very important to understand, is that you're never going to learn the whole thing. You're only going to learn up to some level, and then later on you're going to make incremental gains. And this has a couple of ramifications. The first is that you're going to be making mistakes, like I said. So You have to accept that. You're going to be making mistakes. It's absolutely fine. The second thing is that you have to understand that languages are multifaceted, okay? I lived in Brazil for many years. Okay, I speak Portuguese. But the Portuguese that I learned in Brazil is kind of this casual, informal Portuguese. I probably will not be able to go and make a business presentation in Portuguese simply because I did not learn those words, that kind of Portuguese. Okay, very, very important to understand. I didn't know this when I started out, but that is something to keep in mind. And so the language that you're learning is going to be the language that you're going to know. So if you are learning it by talking with your friends, conversing very in a social setting, very, very informally, then that is the language you're going to know. And that's absolutely fine, right? That is absolutely fine. That is the beauty of a language. We only learn what we need to know. And later on, we learn other things that we need to know as well. But we do not learn everything at once. We learn it step by step, piece by piece. And that is very, very important thing to understand. And so we are talking about a base level of language. And later on, you're going to be adding to that base level. But it's never going to get to 100%. The only people that know 100% of the language are the people that have like PhD in English, PhD in the language. That's all they do. They study that language all the time. And these are the kind of people that are going to have, 100% of the language. The rest of us, we're only going to know pretty much as we need to know. That is kind of the way you have to think about. If you grew up in an informal setting, you only talk to friends, you only learned it with friends, stuff like that, and that is the part of the language you're going to know. And that is absolutely fine. And the second thing is, do not worry about making mistakes. Unless this is the language that your mother spoke to you, you're going to be making mistakes, and that's absolutely fine, and that's absolutely acceptable. And the fifth and the final piece of advice that I can give you, and this really helped me when I lived in Latin America and was studying all these other languages, is you want to be, after you have the base, after you learn kind of just things enough to get around, and after you are not translating it back and forth to another language all the time, once you're talking to people or you're watching TV, which I'm going to get to in a second, you want to start writing down every single day. When you're talking to somebody or you watch something on TV, you want to write down a word that you did not understand. Very, very important. That way you can learn words. So when I was living abroad and I had my base, I had my survival level, I started to communicate with people. And in the beginning, I only knew maybe 10%, and 90% I did not know. Okay? And after a while, after, months, 3 months, 6 months, whatever the case may be, it became 50-50. So 50% I knew, 50% I did not know. And then after another, several months, etc., it got to a point where I was like 80-20. So I understood 80% and 20% I did not know. And then later on it became to 90-20. But at some point I just stopped doing it because I understood enough. It never got to 100, but it got pretty close to 100. It got to a point where I was comfortable. And so this is something I did every single day. So every day, I talked to somebody, I watched something on TV, subtitles, something subtitled. I wrote it down just on my phone in a notepad, and I had like a list of words at the end of the day that I went out and translated. Because what you don't want is you don't want to not know a word and then pretty much never to learn that word. Because that word, if it's spoken frequently, if you hear it in everyday speech, you're gonna hear that word all the time. And so you want to memorize it the first time or the second time. You don't want to keep not knowing it, right? Very, very important. And so that is a system that worked really, really well for me, because that way I fixed the problem as soon as the problem evolved. As soon as I did not know a word, I did not know maybe an expression, I wrote it down. At the end of the day, I looked them up. Another really good way to learn the language, and this is important as you're expanding your vocabulary. Obviously, if you're in the country, it's a lot easier, right? Because all you have to do is go somewhere, watch TV, talk to people, you're going to be getting exposed to it all the time. But if you're not, or you don't have that kind of exposure, try watching TV with subtitles. I watched a lot of YouTube with subtitles. It generates subtitles. Another thing is movies. You know, you can get movies on Netflix if you have Netflix, and they have various subtitles. So one good advice is, this is kind of a life hack for me, is you want to essentially watch a movie once, maybe in your local language like English, and then once you understand what the movie is about, maybe watch it twice, you can then watch it in the other language. So maybe this movie is in Russian, right? And you don't know Russian that well. You're obviously going to learn that you're going to watch it the first time in English, and then maybe you're going to watch it another time just to understand, maybe another, in English again, just so that you understand fully what they're talking about. But later on, you can watch it with Russian subtitles, because you know what the movie is about. You know what the plot is about. So it's going to be a lot easier for you to understand, kind of to get the gist of it. Obviously, you're not going to understand everything, but you are going to have a start. You're going to have a base, and it's going to be a lot easier to go on. All right, guys, so these are my 5 tips to bootstrap yourself and get started with a language fairly quickly when you are forced to learn a new language, or when you have very, very strong motivation to learn a new language. And so I really hope you found this useful. I really hope you've gotten value here. Let me know if you have any questions or comments below. Like it, smash that like button, comment below, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And I will see you in the next episode.